This winter, the United States is staring down a forecast that doesn't look like anything we've seen before. It's not just another cold season, and it's not just another snow map. What's shaping up right now is something unusual. A split winter, a nation divided down the middle, where one half faces relentless storms and Arctic cold, while the other half deals with warmth and drought. So, is this the end times? That's not for me to say. What I can tell you is that this winter looks different, stranger, a season that stacks together pieces of the past in a way we've never seen before. And whether it's a sign of something larger or just a rare alignment of nature, it's the kind of thing we'll be talking about for years. That part alone is strange enough. But add in the instability of the polar vortex 60,000 feet above the North Pole, the history of past winters that suddenly collapsed into chaos, and the increasing odds of rare events like ice storms in Texas or tornadoes in January. And you begin to see why meteorologists are saying this season could be one for the history books. We've seen winters like this in pieces before, but never all at once. And if all of these forces really do align, what does that mean for us? Right now, across the globe, the atmosphere is acting in ways that don't add up neatly. Usually by September, forecasters can lean on the state of the Pacific Ocean to give them a reliable clue about what winter will bring. The story almost always revolves around El Niño or La Niña, ocean temperature patterns that tilt the jet stream and push storm tracks into predictable positions. But this year, things are different. What we have is a weak, almost ghost-like La Niña, just barely strong enough to cross the threshold, but fragile, more like a pebble in the stream than the boulder it's supposed to be. Normally, a strong La Niña would lock in months of consistent cold in the north and dry warmth in the south. But when the signal is this weak, it's vulnerable. One strong atmospheric wave can wash it out completely. That fragility means volatility. Without a dominant driver, the atmosphere becomes unstable, prone to sudden swings. And here's the strange part. Despite the weakness of this year's La Niña, the long-range supercomputer models from the US, Canada, and Europe are all showing the same outcome. They're calling for a split winter. Draw a line across the middle of the country. North of it, colder, wetter, stormier. South of it, warmer, drier, drought-prone. It sounds simple, but in reality, it creates chaos. Where these two air masses meet, that's where the atmosphere breaks loose. That's where ice storms form. That's where blizzards take shape. That's where severe thunderstorms erupt, even in the dead of winter. And that's just the baseline, because sitting above all of this is the polar vortex. Think of it as a spinning top of frozen Arctic air, locked around the North Pole. When it's strong, it keeps the cold bottled up in the far north. But this year, the top is wobbling. Scientists are already seeing signs of instability that could lead to a sudden stratospheric warming event, the technical name for when the vortex cracks open and unleashes Arctic air southward. When that happens, it doesn't just get cold, it gets brutally cold in places that aren't prepared for it. In 2021, when the vortex collapsed, Texas froze so badly that the power grid failed, leaving millions in the dark and over 200 people dead. In 1985, a similar event brought record lows across the Midwest and East Coast, temperatures dropping to levels people thought impossible outside of the Arctic Circle. The models this year suggest we could see not one, but 2 or 3 disruptions. If that happens, the split winter could tilt into something much more extreme. Weeks of Arctic air blasting into the US, overruling everything else. Here's why that's strange. Normally, the odds of a major polar vortex disruption are around 40%. This year, scientists are putting it at 60 to 75%. And in the past, when odds were this high, history shows something always gave way. The last time we had a setup this close was the winter of 2010 to 2011. That year, the Northeast was buried in record snowfall, while the South slipped deeper into drought. School systems shut down for weeks, and even today, people in Boston and New York still talk about that winter. The difference this year? The signals are even more volatile, and the range of possible outcomes stretches wider than usual. So when you hear winter warning this year, it's not hype. It's a reflection of just how strange and uncertain the atmosphere looks right now. A winter balanced on a knife's edge. And if history is any guide, what happens when that edge tips is never ordinary. To understand why this forecast is getting so much attention, it helps to look back. Because what's shaping up for this winter isn't brand new. It's a puzzle made of pieces we've already seen before, just never all together. Take the polar vortex collapses. They're rare, but when they happen, they leave their mark. In January 1985, one of the strongest disruptions ever recorded sent Arctic air plunging into the United States. Chicago dropped to minus 27 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest temperature in the city's history. In places like North Carolina and Georgia, it snowed so hard that towns shut down completely. It was the kind of cold people described as otherworldly. Fast forward to January 2014. The phrase polar vortex suddenly became a household name, as the Midwest and East Coast froze under another breakdown. Minneapolis hit minus 23 degrees Fahrenheit. In Atlanta, highways turned into ice rinks. Thousands of drivers were trapped overnight, some abandoning their cars entirely. Schools closed, flights canceled, and across the country, millions learned firsthand what happens when Arctic air breaks free. And then there's the more recent example, February 2021 in Texas. A polar vortex disruption dropped temperatures below freezing for days. The state's power grid failed, pipes burst, and millions were left in the dark. Over 200 lives were lost, not from the storm itself, but from the cascading failures that followed. That event was unusual not just because of the cold, but because it struck a region that isn't built to handle it. That's one of the biggest dangers of these polar events, when they strike places that aren't ready. But polar vortexes aren't the only piece of this puzzle. Sometimes the strangeness comes from the split personality of winter itself. The forecast this year shows a divided America, cold and wet in the north, warm and dry in the south. That's not entirely new either. In the winter of 2010 to 2011, a similar pattern unfolded. The Northeast was buried under wave after wave of snow. Boston ended up with over 80 inches by the end of the season. Meanwhile, the southern tier of the U.S. was baking under dry skies. Drought worsened in Texas, crops failed, and wildfires flared. It was as if the country was living in two different seasons at the same time. Go further back, and you'll find the winter of 1977 to 1978, remembered for one of the most brutal blizzards in American history. In late January 1978, a storm known as the White Hurricane slammed the Ohio Valley. Winds gusted over 70 miles per hour, snow piled up to 30 inches in some areas, and temperatures plunged. The storm paralyzed entire states, shutting down highways and cutting power for millions. In Ohio, National Guard troops had to be called in to rescue people from stranded cars and snowbound homes. That winter was another classic battleground year, where warm Gulf air collided with Arctic blasts in just the wrong way. And then there's the rise of out-of-season weather, another piece of the puzzle that seems to be appearing more often. In December 2021, a deadly outbreak of tornadoes ripped through Kentucky and neighboring states. Tornadoes in December aren't impossible, but they're rare, especially EF4 monsters that stay on the ground for over 100 miles. That outbreak killed more than 80 people, leaving entire towns leveled just 2 weeks before Christmas. It was a reminder that winter doesn't always mean quiet skies. Here's the strange part. This year's forecast shows conditions that could produce all of these events at once. Polar vortex collapses, a divided America, ice storms in the southern plains, even winter tornadoes. Each one of these has happened before, but never fully combined in the same season. That's why meteorologists are so cautious in how they describe it. Not because they're certain of disaster, but because the range of possibilities is so wide, and the track record of these patterns is filled with strange, unsettling outcomes. We've seen the pieces, This winter may be the first time we see the whole puzzle. 60,000 feet above our heads, circling the Arctic like a crown of ice, spins something most of us never see: the polar vortex. It isn't a storm or a single event. It's a massive circulation of frigid air locked high in the stratosphere, keeping the cold bottled up around the North Pole where it belongs. When it's strong, the vortex spins like a top, fast and stable. All that frozen air stays trapped above the Arctic Circle. Down here, in the mid-latitudes, winters may get chilly, but life goes on. But when the vortex weakens or wobbles, the top slows down. Sometimes it tilts. Sometimes it even splits apart. And when it does, the freezer door opens. Arctic air pours southward into Europe, Asia, and North America, bringing with it the kind of cold that cities aren't built to handle. This year, the vortex is already showing signs of instability, and that's unusual. Most years, we don't know what the vortex will do until late January. But right now, months ahead, atmospheric models are flashing warnings that the top may already be starting to wobble. Scientists estimate a 60 to 75% chance of what's called a sudden stratospheric warming event. That name is misleading. It sounds like things heat up, but what it really means is that warmer air surges into the stratosphere and disrupts the vortex. When that happens, the circulation slows, fractures, or even splits in two. And down below, at the surface, it translates into brutal cold. Temperatures can fall 15 to 25 degrees below normal for weeks at a time. That's what happened in 1985, when Chicago froze at minus 27 degrees Fahrenheit. It's what happened again in 2014, when highways in the South turned to sheets of ice. And it's what happened in 2021, when Texas plunged into crisis as Arctic air swept through the state. Those weren't just random cold snaps. Each one was triggered by a polar vortex disruption. The strange part this year is that forecasters aren't expecting just one disruption. They're watching for 2 or even 3. Multiple events stacked across the season. If that happens, it won't be a single freeze we remember. It could be a winter defined by recurring blows of Arctic air, hitting again and again, wearing down infrastructure, supply chains, and communities that barely have time to recover before the next wave arrives. And here's where the forecast grows even stranger. The long-range models aren't just pointing to cold. They're showing patterns where that cold collides with warmer, wetter air streaming up from the Gulf of Mexico. That collision zone, stretching across the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, and into the Northeast, is where the real drama happens. Ice storms, nor'easters, blizzard conditions, thunderstorms in the dead of January. Meteorologists call this a battleground setup. It's the same recipe that produced the blizzard of '78 in the Ohio Valley and the snow-choked winter of 2010 to 2011 in New England. But this time, the atmosphere isn't just volatile. It's unpredictable, unstable, and driven by a polar vortex that seems ready to falter. What makes this so unusual is not that the vortex weakens. History shows it happens once every couple of years. What makes it strange is the alignment. A fragile La Niña in the Pacific, an unstable polar vortex above the Arctic, and warm, moisture-laden Gulf air below. These are 3 separate forces, each capable of chaos on its own. But this year, they're all lining up at once. And that alignment is why forecasters are warning that this winter may not look like any other. We've seen these forces act alone, but together, that's new. And it's why this forecast feels less like business as usual and more like something history will remember. If you were to draw a line across the United States this winter, right through the middle of the country, you'd be sketching the forecast that long-range models are showing. North of that line, cold, wet, and stormy. South of it, warm, dry, and drought-prone. On its own, that sounds like just another weather map. But when you start to look at what it really means, the picture becomes a lot stranger. Let's start in the north. From the Pacific Northwest across the northern plains and into the Great Lakes and Northeast, the models are calling for enhanced storm tracks, and more frequent intrusions of Arctic air. That combination means one thing: snow. Not the occasional dusting, but repeated heavy events. In places like Minnesota, Michigan, New York, and New England, the setup points to a season of above-average snowfall, frequent blizzards, and in some cases the kind of lake-effect snow events that can bury entire towns under several feet in just a couple of days. In the South, the picture flips. California, Arizona, Texas, the Deep South, and even Florida are projected to see warmer than normal temperatures and significantly less rainfall. For the drought-stricken Southwest, that means water shortages may deepen. In Southern California, the fire weather risk climbs higher as dry conditions linger into the winter months. Across the Southeast, residents may see lower heating bills, but they'll also face a higher chance of winter severe weather outbreaks, tornadoes and destructive storms arriving out of season. That split, snowstorms and blizzards in the north, warmth and drought in the south, isn't unheard of. But here's what makes it strange. This time, the models from multiple agencies all agree on it. American, European, Canadian, 3 different systems, all pointing to the same divide. When 3 independent forecasts align, meteorologists pay attention. The last time we saw something similar was 2010 to 2011, when the Northeast got hammered with record snow, while Texas sank deeper into drought. Boston recorded over 80 inches of snow that year, while Texas wildfires scorched more than 3 million acres. 2 completely different realities, unfolding at the same time. But this year, the split looks sharper. The dividing line cuts right through the heart of the country, setting up a battleground zone where the 2 air masses collide. That's where the biggest risks lie. Ice storms in Oklahoma and Missouri, winter tornadoes in Arkansas or Tennessee, freezing rain stretching from northern Texas into the Ohio Valley. These are the kinds of hybrid events that happen when warm, moist Gulf air smashes into Arctic blasts spilling down from the north. For people living along that collision zone, this winter could feel like 2 seasons happening at once. One week, shorts and t-shirts. The next week, ice on the power lines and snowdrifts in the driveway. Meteorologists call it weather whiplash, and it's the direct result of an unstable atmosphere flipping back and forth. And here's the unsettling part. When you step back, the map looks less like a normal winter pattern and more like a country divided in half. On one side, too much water falling as snow. On the other, too little water falling as rain. The north drowning in snowbanks, the south drying out further. Both extremes happening simultaneously. It's not the kind of neat seasonal story we're used to. It's a split-screen forecast, one that shows just how unusual this winter could be. And while we've seen pieces of it before, rarely has the entire setup lined up so clearly, so early, across so many different models. That's why forecasters are saying this winter could be memorable, not just for the storms, but for the sheer strangeness of watching one country live through 2 opposite winters at the same time. So where does all of this leave us? A weak La Niña struggling to take hold, a polar vortex already wobbling before the season even begins, a country split down the middle, snow piling in the north, drought deepening in the south, and a collision zone across the Midwest and Ohio Valley where blizzards, ice storms, and even tornadoes could erupt in the dead of winter. Individually, none of these things are unprecedented. We've seen polar vortex collapses before. We've had winters that divided the country. We've even seen out-of-season tornadoes and ice storms that coated entire states in glass. But here's the strange part. We've never seen all of these signals lining up at once, in the same year, with so many models pointing to the same outcome. That's what makes this winter unusual. It's not that something brand new is happening. It's that history's strangest winters are stacking their pieces on the same board. For people in the north, that means preparing for more snow than usual, not just in quantity, but in intensity. For people in the south, it means bracing for drought and fire weather, with the unsettling possibility of severe storms in months that used to be calm. And for those caught in between, in that central battleground zone. It means facing the kind of unpredictability that defines history-making winners. Freezing rain one week, tornadoes the next, followed by a sudden Arctic plunge. This is why forecasters call the 2025 to 2026 season a winter on the knife's edge. Because while no one can say exactly which way it will tip, the signals are pointing to a season that will not be ordinary. And that's the takeaway here. We're not talking about end times or wild speculation. We're talking about a set of facts, lined up in a way that doesn't happen often: a fragile ocean pattern, a faltering vortex, a nation divided by weather, and the real possibility that this winter could end up being one of those seasons people talk about decades from now, pointing back and saying, that was the strange one. So when you hear the phrase winter warning this year, remember, it isn't just hype. It's a recognition that the atmosphere is lining up in a way we've only seen in pieces before. And if history is any guide, when those pieces finally come together, things rarely stay quiet.